Well, thanks, David, and thanks everybody for joining this evening. As David said, my name is Travis Hamill. I am the DC director for the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization based out of Salt Lake City, Utah, but we have offices in both Moab, Utah, in the southern part of the state, and also here in DC. We also have our grassroots organizers who are spread all over the place. I see Amy, who is here in the chat, and Amy got to work with me. She's an alumnus of, we're alumnus of both alumni of George Mason University, and she got to work with me at SUWA. Amy, good to see you. Glad you're here. Um, one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about before we get started is just about, where things are in our current state of policy regarding public lands. I'm a little bit discombobulated today because I have been, over the last few days, really busy working against what we are referring to as public land sell-off language in the Senate reconciliation bill. This is a shortcut funding bill that would allow to get around the filibuster in the Senate. And there's provisions in there that would require, the Department of Interior to work to sell federal public lands across the West in 11 states to make way for billionaire tax cuts. That's the state of play that we're in right now. My organization has been around since 1983, and we have been through many an anti-public lands administration. We have fought and won many times to defend against bad legislation on federal public lands. And we have also protected nearly 1 million acres of federal lands, Federal Bureau of Land Management lands in the state of Utah over the last 40 years. And on top of that, other lands throughout the state see regular protection through other administrative and other types of protection. So what I will say is we're in dire circumstances right now, but we've been here before. And it's not just in Utah, this is across the country. And I work with people from all across the environmental sphere here in Washington, D.C. and around the country. And so I'm grateful for people like you all who are engaged, listening and coming to events like this to learn and be informed so that we can make sure to protect places that we care about. So I wanted to talk about the Utah Wilderness Movement, which is not just my organization, but we are definitely a big player in the movement in Utah to protect wilderness. Going to go all the way back to 1964, and that was with the passage of the Wilderness Act, which created the National Wilderness Preservation System. It gave Congress the power to designate qualifying federal land as Big W wilderness. But I will say that no legislation is perfect, and the Wilderness Act is no exception. It did fail to recognize that Indigenous people maintain ties to these so-called wild places that were displaced, and these people were displaced by both protective designations in the past, but also by westward movement and the forcible removal of people from the places that is home for them. We work with a coalition called the National Wilderness Coalition, and one of the biggest goals is to make sure that Indigenous communities are not just given a seat at the table, but are helping drive the narrative and the push to protect places that need protecting, because that's what's important. So we can talk about wilderness through a lens of, it is untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain, in the words of Aldo Leopold, who participated in the wilderness movement. But we also have a little bit more stringent rules about what wilderness means, how we define that. So first of all is a unit of land, an intact area. And there's a guideline of being about 5,000 acres or more. And the idea is that there needs to be an element of solitude. If you're in a few acre wilderness area right next to the highway, that isn't the wilderness experience that people are. There also needs to be no roads. It needs to be a roadless area. So no places that have travel lanes, travel areas that are constructed, maintained, or see regular use. There also needs to be a natural experience in these areas. And there also needs to be additional value to the landscape. It's really easy to look at places in Utah and Virginia as well and call it a pretty face. But there needs to be additional value to these lands, whether it's educational, scientific, or historical or cultural value to these landscapes. One of my favorite places in southern Utah, I hope some of you have either been or will have the chance to get there, is Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, which we often refer to as the Science Monument. Just a couple of years ago, there was a new species of dinosaur that was discovered in the monument. So there's a lot of really cool things about these places that are protected. So let's talk about wilderness. Why is it important? It's important to protect for a lot of different reasons, but one of the biggest ones that sometimes is often missed in desert landscapes is its value in carbon sequestration in a time of climate change. Wilderness is important for critical habitat and migratory corridors for endemic species, not just in the United States, but in our continent as well. We think about the spine of the continent, which goes from Central America all the way up into the Arctic. Those are parts of that migratory corridors. We've also got protection of important cultural sites that are through wilderness areas, buffer zones for intact landscapes. We think about landscape connectivity. I know that's something that Wild Virginia often works on. This is really important for ensuring the protection of these ecosystems. Wilderness can protect riparian zones, cryptobiotic soils. Some of you are maybe familiar with this. It's a very, very cool science. But in the desert, we have a lot of these cryptobiotic soils, which are interwoven communities of life that keep the dust down and prevent dust storms, as well as providing places for insects and small animals to find food and nest and reproduce. And then finally, we also have the wilderness can provide primitive opportunities for recreation and solitude, especially in an ever-changing or extremely infuriating congressional world, right? So wilderness designation grants the highest form of protection applicable under U.S. code. So this means that there are no new roads, there is no mechanized travel, and that includes biking. There is no permanent structures or development. There's no extraction of mining, logging, oil, gas, timber, other types of things. And again, there's this primitive access to recreation. So I did want to highlight a little bit of what's in Virginia. So in Virginia, we actually have over 215,000 acres of designated federal wilderness, some of them in places like Shenandoah National Park, which is the vast majority of our wilderness, but also in places like George Washington National Forest and Jefferson National Forest, like St. Mary's Wilderness or Ramsey's Draft. James River Face Wilderness and Stone Mountain are just a few examples. There are 24 individual parcels of wilderness designated in Virginia, all of them in National Forest land except for Shenandoah, which is Park Service land. What we're going to talk about tonight is Bureau of Land Management lands. We don't have any of those in Virginia. We might have some subsurface Bureau of Land Management. But for those unfamiliar, the Bureau of Land Management is a multiple use agency at the Department of the Interior, which is different from, say, a National Park Service agency, which is about preservation and recreation. With the Bureau of Land Management, we're going to be talking about places that are federally managed, that can be open for extraction, that can be open for recreation, offered vehicle use, or could also be part of the wilderness preservation system. So when we think about wilderness, we've got all these guidelines. In 1976, the federal government was tasked by Congress to inventory public lands all throughout the West and identify those meeting the criteria as a wilderness study area. A wilderness study area is kind of like a stopgap measure between currently public land, which has no designation, and a designated wilderness area. So these are places that are identified by the Bureau of Land Management to meet those values that we talked about earlier. After the passage of FLTMA, that is how most of us refer to it here in the Hill, the BLM did a wilderness inventory in the early 1980s, and it was trash. Out of 23 million acres of BLM land in Utah, and keep in mind this was 45 years ago, the BLM identifies only about 2.5 million acres of wilderness. There was a lot of discussion about how some of these inventory participants had gone out and said, this is too far from anything. No one would ever come here, so it's not worth protecting as wilderness, which I would argue is the exact reason to identify it as wilderness, right? So the importance of this particular inventory was that it galvanized support to do our own inventory. And so this is the founding crew of the Utah Wilderness Coalition, of which SUWA is a steering committee member. And our organization, SUWA, was built out of the Utah Wilderness Coalition with help from groups like Wilderness Society and Sierra Club and Natural Resources Defense Council. So we did our own inventory. We used the same criteria that was used by the Bureau of Land Management to identify lands. We sent people out into these places, and we had them come back and report back about what it should actually be. What should the number actually be? And so over time, we did further and further inventories. We grew as an organization, and in the early 90s, we completed Wilderness at the Edge, which is a full inventory, and completed is in quotes here because we're always inventorying these lands, right? This tome of a book is what is the guiding force for when we built out our very first piece of legislation, which, oops, I'm sorry, I'm going to pass over this, which is America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. And this is our guide. This is the legislation that puts forward everything that we focus on. This is how we measure success. It's how we are able to have a starting point for negotiations. And so the first time this was introduced was in 1989, and I usually joke that this bill was introduced the same year I was born, so it's just as old as I am. But it was introduced into Congress in the House by Representative Wayne Owens from Utah. And it was 5.7 million acres in size, more than double what the BLM had identified in their initial inventory. In the early 90s, this bill was not well received by the mostly Republican delegation as a bunch of out-of-state meddlers. But the Senate version of this bill would not be introduced until 1997, when Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois was the one who introduced it. So here's where we are in 1995. You can see here, this is the proposed wilderness as a part of the bill. As a part of a 1995 bill. This was from Jim Henson from Utah. He intended to solve the wilderness problem, because wilderness is a problem in his eyes, in Utah once and for all. And so the Utah Public Lands Management Act of 1995 would give 1.8 million acres in wilderness designation. Hansen told us at SUWA, you better take this. It's the best you will ever get. That's an actual quote. We have it written down. We still have the note that it's on. And of course, we said that's ridiculous. So just to put it in perspective here, for those of you who've been down here before, Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument is mostly in this area here. We have over here, we have Zion and Bryce. Then there's Canyonlands, which is up here in Grand County. We have Arches National Park. Down here in San Juan County is where the Bears Ears National Monument currently is. So this is missing a lot of connected landscape as a part of the wilderness proposal in 1995. So here's a little bit of an example here. You can see on the everything in this green color, these are all BLM designated wilderness study areas from 1976 to 1980. So in comparison, we're going to go back one. In comparison, you can see just just how little is identified in Hansen's bill versus what the BLM had actually already identified as having wilderness character. So moving along, we have the establishment of Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument in 1999 under the Clinton administration. And then we have everything in orange you see is the BLM identified wilderness character from 1999 to present day. There has been additional inventories by the BLM of what has wilderness character. So you can see how things are growing. Let's add in a little bit more. We had some big wins in protecting wilderness. So in 2000, there was a land trade between the Bureau of Land Management and the School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, SITLA. SITLA is a state agency, and they own or manage a checkerboard of lands across the state of Utah to be used for extraction to pay for public schools. What ends up happening, though, is that you'll have a large area of federal land, and you'll have these little pockets. You can kind of see them on this map here, little tiny pockets of SITLA lands. And so the idea is if we can switch the SITLA lands out to somewhere else, they can be all in one place, which is easier for SITLA to manage and extract. But also it allows for the federal lands to be contained all in one area, which makes it easier to manage. So that was a big win in making sure that things were more contained and together. In 2006, we established the Cedar Mountains Wilderness, which is here in the western part of the state. I know we're called the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, but we'll work on any wilderness in Utah. And then in 2009, we had the Washington County Bill, which was down here, and it protected some of the largest areas of BLM wilderness in the state of Utah. But we're not done yet. So in 2017 or so, we started the process of working on the Emery County Public Land Management Act, which was a long fought amount of work. And the original work on Emery County goes back to the early 2000s. But you can see everything in green here in this section right here. That's all brand new wilderness, 660,000 acres of public lands designated as wilderness during the first Trump administration, which I'll have to say I did not have on my bingo card. We also have the establishment of the Bears Ears National Monument under President Obama, which was slashed by Trump during his first term, but was reestablished during Biden's administration. So I think it's important to look at this map and think back to that first offer by Jim Henson in 1995. It's a big difference. And it's through the perseverance of organizations like ours and others that we work with. You know, we definitely didn't do any of this stuff alone. We did this in conjunction with many different organizations to get where we are today. But as it stands, the Utah delegation does not support America's Red Rock Wilderness. Unfortunately, it's a reflection of the beliefs of a few in the leadership roles within the state and within the delegation, but it is not the case for Utah's population. According to recent polling, there's a Colorado College poll that's done every year called the State of the Rockies poll, and they poll throughout the western states. And in Utah, more than 70% of people in the state of Utah are in support of protecting public lands. More than 90% are supportive of protecting the national monuments. Overwhelmingly, support for recreation, conservation, and preservation within the state on public lands is very, very popular. But unfortunately, the delegation is not on board with that. So this is where we started. This was before SUWA and the BLM wilderness preservation movement had started with our national parks, national monuments, and recreation areas in the state of Utah. And here's where we are now. So my job at SUWA is, as our DC director, I lead all of our policy work on Capitol Hill surrounding America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. The current iteration of the bill would protect over 8 million acres of public lands as wilderness. Our current support team that keep us moving forward are Senator Dick Durbin, who, after almost 30 years of being SUWA's champion on America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, will be retiring at the end of this Congress. We're going to miss him very dearly. And Representative Melanie Stansbury of New Mexico, who is in her second Congress of leading as our sponsor. Just this past spring, and it looks like I have numbers from the 118th Congress, so that is my fault. We had 16 co-sponsors we have 16 co-sponsors currently in the Senate, and we have 51 with a few more on the way in the House. Last Congress, we ended with 24 co-sponsors in the Senate and 96 in the House. This is well supported by our friends in Congress. I will also say that in our efforts to ensure that we are working with our tribal partners and tribal nations that call this region home since time immemorial, we have been individually reaching out to the tribal governments to find support and buy-in and endorsement from them for this legislation. And so far, the Navajo Nation, the Hopi Tribal Council, and the Zuni Pueblo Tribal Council have all officially, through their governmental processes, endorsed America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. And I will say that the Hopi Tribal Council released their endorsement in both English and Hopi. And I can't read a lick of it, but it's really cool to have that. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was one of the first times that they did so. So the threats that we currently face today on public lands. Project 2025 included all sorts of horrible language regarding public lands. It was written by William Perry Penley, who worked in the first Trump administration, and you couldn't find a more ardent opponent of public lands. Project 2025 says that the national monuments in Utah, both Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante, should be rescinded, would open the public lands for wanton extraction under this drill baby drill mindset. Secretary Doug Burgum of Department of Interior has called public lands part of the national balance sheet, that selling off public lands is a way to help balance our budget. And I would argue that at this point, it's just a way to pay for tax breaks for the rich, because there have been huge tax breaks and no way to actually pay for those other than selling off public lands. Selling lands with claims of grandeur, but no real guardrails in the current reconciliation bill. We talk about, how the Utah delegation talks about how there's all this support for affordable housing and water projects and infrastructure and all this kind of stuff. And none of that is spelled out in the language of the reconciliation. In all sorts of different types of legislation, some of it, unfortunately, even bipartisan, there are exemptions from NEPA and other bedrock environmental policies on forest management for so-called fire risk. There's also mass firings of career land managers and DOI staff, which is making it difficult to manage these lands and keep them in a state that visitation can continue to happen. And on top of that, I think there's an element of apathy as well. There are a lot of things that are being thrown at us. It's like drinking through a fire hose on a regular basis, whether it's something regarding public lands or environmental issues that we care about, or things that affect our families and our friends. That apathy can be really hard because people have to find what they can latch onto and can work for. But I would argue that everything is intersected, right? We need to be active in what calls to us so that we can collectively work to fight back against the really terrible decisions currently being made by Congress and the administration. So hopefully we can think about the great things that public lands can bring to us, whether we're in Virginia or in Utah or anywhere else in the country. Public lands are really rare around the world, to have these places that belong to all of us that we can all enjoy. So in this picture, we on the top left, that's our former executive director out with some congressional staff out in Utah, taking a look at some of these places that have been proposed for wilderness and showing them why it's so important. We do a trip like this every year where we take folks from the Hill out to see these places. On the right was a friend's wedding that I got to go to, and we did it on the river. It It was absolutely lovely. Um, on the left, we have in the middle there is Representative Stansbury in the long black coat. We took her out to the Great Salt Lake to talk about water issues. Her background is in water issues, and so we wanted to talk directly to her about those things. On the right, we have our activists and many of our staff with Senator Durbin during a big fly-in that we do every year so that people have an opportunity to come and share why protecting wilderness is so important and to make sure that our champions are well appreciated. And we're also on the Hill regularly. This is the work that I get to do every day. This on the left, we're with Representative Pedersen from Colorado and Representative Ivey from Maryland, out telling everybody on the Hill, please don't sell our public lands. And this was about a few days, this was like 3 or 4 days before the vote on the House Natural Resources, on the House Reconciliation Bill. And the House Natural Resources Committee had included language to sell off lands in Utah. And we were able to defeat that in the House. And on the right, we have our new executive director. He's been here all week. We've been meeting with members and senators and talking about the plans that our organization has in the future and meeting with our coalition partners to make sure that we're best positioned to ensure that we're able to move forward and protect public lands. So before I get into the questions, I think one thing I would like to remind, it's been a long day. These places are awesome. This is just a just a sampling. For those of you who have been, I hope you get to go again. For those of you who haven't, I'm always willing to play travel agent. But these are places that are unlike any other, and we want to make sure that they stay that way. So that's the reason we do this work. Would love to open it up to any questions folks might have. Also connect with us on social media if you're on there. We are on Facebook and on Instagram, and our website is really easy. It's SUWA.org. And if at any point you have questions or you want to get connected with our organization, we have organizers that work in all 50 states. We don't have 50 organizers, they cover multiple states. But we'll get you connected with them. So feel free to reach out to me over email. Again, really easy, travis@SUWA.org. And I'm grateful to be able to be a board member of Wild Virginia and continue the work in my backyard as well. I've been fighting for Utah's public lands for about 10 years now, and to be able to join the Wild Virginia board has been a real pleasure. So I'm grateful for the work that we're able to do here in Virginia and also across the West. So thanks.
That was amazing, Travis. And I was going to say you could put that other beautiful picture back up, but that's okay. I'm going to be looking at it later again. Um, and we are very happy to have Travis on our board at Wild Virginia. And I think again, it shows that um, people need to understand that all this is connected. You take, for example, you're talking about weakening NEPA. That affects everything. That affects everybody in the country, whether you know it or not. And in the context of Travis's work, in the context of our work, how we manage public lands, but also how other kinds of projects like bad pipelines and other things that we work on a lot. Um, and I'll tell you, Travis, people are being kind of shy here, which surprises me because I see some participants who I know must have questions. But while they get warmed up, I have questions.
Absolutely.
One of the things that excites me that you reported is having the tribes endorse these positions, and I think that's so important, but not always doesn't always come as easily as we would like it to be. And can you just talk a little bit more about how your organization, how the coalitions that you work directly with the tribes, and how that relationship happens?
Sure. The biggest one is by meeting them where they're at.
Mhm.
We have long had good relationships with tribal organizations and with leaders of the tribes that are involved in public lands decisions in Utah. And we have our disagreements, and we have different goals and opportunities that are done there. But I think the most important thing is being a good partner. Um, One of the ways we were able to exemplify our desire to be a good partner is that so this actually happened on my second day of working at SUWA, so I can't claim any validity for my ability to be a part of this choice. But at the time, our organization and many others had been working on a proposal for a national monument in southern Utah. This was before the Bears Ears National Monument, to protect an area around Canyonlands National Park, which is to the west of Moab.
Mhm.
Excuse me, the additional areas outside of Canyonlands. And this would have completed the original vision of what Canyonlands should be. I unfortunately don't have a map of Canyonlands handy at the moment, but Canyonlands has some very sheer straight lines across the landscape, which, as we can all see, Canyon country is winding and natural and not these sheer lines across the land. So, one of the things that we were really wanting to do was make sure that continuing on Canyonlands, or on Canyonlands, the Greater Canyonlands National Monument would be the wise decision. Or at the time, the Bears Ears National Monument proposal, which came together at the behest of the 5 tribes that were a part of the Bears Ears, that are a part of the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition, was starting to gain a little bit of traction. And so we decided, my second day of work, to cancel the remainder of the push for Greater Canyonlands, to throw our weight behind the tribes that had been making a lot of really great progress and support them as best we can. And that was one of the most important ways for us to show our tribal partners that we're in this with you guys, and we want to work with you and support you as we can. And just a few years later, we had a brand new actually a year later, we had a brand new national monument in southern Utah that encapsulated almost 1.4 million acres of protected landscape. And since then, we have worked with our tribal partners and the Intertribal Coalition to continue to defend Bears Ears National Monument, whether it's through lawsuits during the first Trump administration or working with the Biden administration to make sure it was reestablished. But that was a really important factor for us. Another was working with one of our former board members, Mark Maryboy, who is a really awesome guy, first Navajo County Commissioner in southern Utah, in San Juan County. And he also was a great support for us to be able to make those connections with the tribes. And so building those personal relationships at the person to person, at the SUWA staff to tribal member level was really important for ensuring that. And most importantly, to continue building that relationship. So.
Okay, well, that's great. And as I expected, people are now getting excited and asking questions. Um, how about, Kali, you and I kind of switch off? I'm going to ask the first one here from the Q&A, but I know there are some in the chat too. So let me get this one, and then maybe you can hit one of the ones from chat if you're willing to do that. Laura asked, are our own senators, Kane and Warner, among the co-sponsors of the bills that you're pushing?
That's a great question. Currently, the answer is no. They have been a little bit resistant to co-sponsor. Their view of it in the past, as far as conversations we have had, has been about wanting to give deference to the senators from the state, from Utah. What I will say is that Representative Don Beyer, Representative God rest his soul, Jerry Connolly, as well as Bobby Scott, and also formerly Don McEachin, also rest, are all co-sponsors at some point. So we do have support from Virginia in the House. senators from Virginia have both been really active on the Virginia wilderness bill they're working on. And I've currently got some meetings scheduled with them to go and say, hey, let's talk wilderness. Let's see how we can work together and support Virginia wilderness while also protecting Utah wilderness. And I think, too, one of the things of including this sell off language by Chairman Lee from Utah, I'm so sorry that Utah is the one providing our current Senate ENR champion, excuse me, chairman. But, I think one of the things that has really changed the calculus at this point is that the chairman is using his position to put forward some really terrible policy that senators like Kane and Warner are going to want to fight back against. But I am a Virginian. I live in Alexandria, but I'm going to need support from the rest of you who have ties to Virginia. So if you can call your senator and tell them, hey, I want you to co-sponsor America's Red Rock Wilderness Act. All they got to do is reach out to Senator Durbin. It's that easy. So feel free to email me if you want some talking points or some additional assistance in getting that out there. You can also go to our website, SUWA.org, and we have opportunities you can take action from there. It's a great
Well, that
question.
sounds like a perfect thing for us to do in the follow-up email is to have a link to your information so people can do that.
Sounds great. I'll pass it along.
Yeah, great. Kylie, do you want to ask one of the questions?
Yep. So, someone asks, what's the single most critical action for us to take now and to urge others to take?
Yeah, I think there's two. I don't think you can have just one, because the first thing that I would say is that you should contact your member of Congress. And you can do this on our website. You can find out who is already a co-sponsor. So whether you're in Virginia or New York or California, it doesn't matter. But you can call your member and their office in Washington, D.C. And if they're a co-sponsor, thank them, because we want to make sure that they know that they are appreciated for the things they're doing for their constituents. And if they're not a co-sponsor, then you need to tell them, I'd like you to become one, because they answer to you. The flip side of that is that you then need to tell somebody that you think would care about this and want to get involved as well. Because your call to your senator can be compounded over time the more people you tell about these important issues. And it also will get your senators or your House members to pay attention to these kinds of things when they come across the desk. Or when I email them and I need to go talk to them, they will have already heard from their constituents and say, oh, yeah, we've heard from folks that care about this. We should talk to these folks from SUWA to make sure that we're informed about what's going on. So tell your elected officials and tell some folks you know. Those are the two things, most important things.
Great. I'm going to try one here. Did I understand you to say that there can be a wilderness area within a popular national park? If so, how is it differentiated?
That's a great question. I like to think about wilderness as the most adaptable type of designation, because you can have wilderness designated lands on any type of federal land. So it can exist in Forest Service land, Park Service land, BLM lands, Fish and Wildlife lands. And if I see Anders in the chat, Anders, fact check me on this. I think you can even have it in DoD lands as well. But there is no difference between its management or the types of places where it can be designated. It's just a layer of additional protection on top of the already protected areas. So it still has to follow all the same rules and regulations put forward under the Federal Lands Policy and Management Act and the Wilderness Act. It's a great question.
Before you ask another one, Kali, one of the things that comes to mind, though, is that our popular national parks here, again, we don't have huge areas, and some of them are so heavily visited that I wonder how easy it is to find places that have the kind of character that you need. Not that it can't be, but
right. And I think that's the importance of protecting places like those that we have in Utah. I'm talking about a bill that's literally 8 3.5 million acres of federal land. It is truly the largest wilderness bill introduced in the Congress. There is no bigger wilderness bill. And that is because these are places that are truly wild, truly very much in their natural state. And we need to protect them because that is shrinking every year. That ability to have those large scale preserved areas is becoming rarer and rarer. And so we need to make that action happen now.
All right. So the next one, they said their question is more of a wish against a backdrop of limited resources, meaning funding and time. With that being said, I feel like those of us in Virginia who are fighting our own good fights could learn much from SUWA's experiences and perhaps vice versa. So they were just wondering if there's any suggestions you may have now or in time to promote co-learning.
Absolutely. I think there are a few really important things to do in a legislative fight or in a conservation style fight that we have found to be really helpful. And I'm going to drag in a little bit of Anders's question in the chat for this. The most important thing in a lot of ways is sheer numbers. The more people involved, the more people active on this, the more people calling in to their elected officials, whether at the local, state, federal level, doesn't really matter. The more people involved, the more action can be taken, right? I mean, we live in a democracy that responds to that. What I would say is that our coalitions are so important. My organization only has 32 staff. We also have about 15,000 dues paying members, and we have maybe a few 100,000 supporters across the country. But I work regularly with a wonderful crew of people as a part of the National Wilderness Coalition, of which Anders at Southern Environmental Law Center, my counterpart over there, also currently working just a few floors down from me in the same building. Partners like that are the ones that are able to help spread the load and bring in different types of expertise. So our team at SUWA is really great. We have lawyers who are on the ground in the field, observing the management that Bureau of Land Management is doing on the ground so that we can adapt and respond to things as they're happening. Folks at SELC, they have really great relationships with members on both sides of the aisle. My organization's a little scrappy and Republicans have some trouble with us. But with SELC and the 35 other organizations that make up the National Wilderness Coalition, we are able to bring everybody's experiences and expertise into the room and get some really good work done. Just recently, Anders had been working with a Republican from Arkansas to preserve the flat-side wilderness and make the flat-side wilderness larger. And that bill in the House passed by unanimous consent. And the National Wilderness Coalition was able to do a little bit of work in the background to support that and make sure that Democrats knew it was a good bill. So that type of work is happening now. And so for any of you that work in an organization that has any interest in wilderness or wilderness adjacent things or environmental justice, please reach out and we'll connect you with the coordinator for the National Wilderness Coalition, because we are always looking for new members, and we're trying to make sure that there's organizations and groups of people representing all the different regions of the country, not just the West.
Okay, there's one other question I'm going to ask, but I'm going to stick mine in first. I'll take
Okay.
my prerogative as the
Right on.
You mentioned a little while ago that there was something you won recently in the House, and then you were talking about working with people from both sides of the aisle, which obviously is important. First of all, I don't think of the House as being the best place to win things for our interest at this point in time. So I'm interested in how that worked. And also, we're always thinking about what is the message? How do I approach my congressman, who I guarantee you does not consider himself an environmentalist or
Yeah.
a conservationist necessarily, but there's got to be some interest that we can draw on. So what do you bring forward to those folks?
Sure, it's hard. And I think it's important to know that there are going to be folks in Congress, there are going to be folks at the state house, at your local level, that are diametrically opposed to you and your views. That doesn't mean you shouldn't contact them, though. It's so important that, in fact, I would argue even more important that they hear from you, because they will think twice about the most drastic measures that they will take. And I think a good example of this is just recently in the House reconciliation text, there was language from excuse me, my cat means out. Sorry. This is what happens when you're at home. So just recently in the House reconciliation bill text in the House Natural Resources Committee, Representative Amade from Nevada and Malloy from Southern Utah introduced an amendment that would have sold off over 550,000 acres of federal public lands for a myriad of different reasons. But overall, the opposition was there. Now, this was done at 11:45 at night after a 13-hour hearing without any text available ahead of time, no maps available. It was literally handed to everyone. There was debate had on the amendment, and then the vote happened. Right. So one of the ways that we were able to message quite heavily was that this is not the process for public land sales. Mm-hmm. We are diametrically opposed to selling of public lands. But if it's going to happen, it has to involve the public because they are public lands. Now, Representative Malloy's office argued that, well, it was public because it was in a public hearing. I'm going to argue that that was a load of crap. But what is important is that we were able to call that out and say, this is not the avenue for this. We were able to speak with some more moderate members. Former Secretary of Interior during the first Trump administration, Ryan Zinke, representative from Montana, is a part of the Public Lands Caucus, which is a brand new caucus, grouping of both Democrat and Republican members on the Hill to speak out on public lands issues. And he said that he would be a no vote on the reconciliation bill if that was in there. And that was enough, along with other work with other Republican members. That was enough to eventually pull that language out before it came to a floor vote. Now, again, that has resurfaced on the Senate side in a little different measure with Senator Lee. We're now up to between 2.5, 3.5 million acres that could be sold off. So can't say we're anywhere improved. But that is part of the process. Is like, that's why these coalition groups are so important, because my organization does not have a good relationship with Zinke's office. I'm working to change that. But our coalition partners do. And so we're able to provide a lot of information that we can share with our partners that do have those good relationships. And that's how we're able to work together and defeat that type of provision.
Great. So the question that I deferred, I'm going to get back to now, and that is, are there currently any plans to find another champion for the Red Rocks Wilderness Act in the Senate, since you're losing Durbin?
Absolutely. And because I also stumble over it all the time, you can also call it the Red Rock bill. That also works great. Okay. So, part of the process is working with our current champion. He's still got another 18 months before he's done with this Congress. So there are lots of really great senators that would make good replacements, but that conversation has delicately not happened yet. So, but it is in the hopper, and he's aware. And after 30 years of being our champion and coming out with us to Utah multiple times, he even took his family out there for a number of trips. So he will make sure to leave us in good hands. Any other questions before we adjourn?
Yeah, we have one more.
Nice.
What lawsuits are currently underway relevant to the threats to public lands, including national forests? I think that's probably a pretty big question. But
yeah, who wants to stay another hour and a half? I will say that as the legislative director, I only have headspace for the stuff that happens on the Hill, not in the courts. We have a legal team that are made up of some real crack attorneys, just really awesome folks. We actually have both wildlands lawyers who are the only way I would ever want to become a lawyer is if I got to do this job, which is they go out in the field camping for multiple days at a time to make sure that the management is happening the way it's supposed to, and they report back and file lawsuits if that's not the case. They get to go out there with their dogs and spend time out in the wilderness. I'm very jealous every time they tell me they're heading out. We also have our staff attorneys up in Salt Lake City, and their job is to look at all the policy. My job is to track all the policy that's coming, whether proposed or coming from the Department of Interior, or how things are being implemented, and send that along to our attorneys so that they can make sure that there's not something that's slipping through the cracks or something that we need to take action on or alert for our champions or the co-sponsors of our bill. Right now, there's a number of lawsuits that we're involved in. There's still the potential for future lawsuits on national monuments should the Department of the Interior and the Trump administration follow through on their threats to undo or drastically change the boundaries of national monuments. A lot of times, those types of lawsuits, though, are done in conjunction with partners at other organizations we work closely with. So there's quite a few things out there, but we've had lawsuits recently, everything from dealing with poor implementation of NEPA on the ground, proposals for roads to be established, travel management and resource management plans released that during the first Trump administration were released and were absolutely terrible. So we sued on them, and we got better ones during the Biden administration. And now those are being rescinded. So there's a lot of back and forth and arguments about that. But we've got, I believe it's 9 attorneys on our staff that work to make sure that those functions continue and are tracked and we don't miss any. It's a great question.
Well, I want to make a point about that because I get questions a lot about, Trump says his executive order says we're going to open up all the national forests and cut down all the trees. And what I tell him is there are a bunch of steps involved usually in those kinds of things. Now, Congress
Yeah,
pass a law and the president can sign it, and that becomes sometimes the final answer. But just having an executive order, even passing a law, there are other steps that had to happen. Regulations, they might try to change regulations, but you still get to challenge whether those regulations reflect what the law requires, and very often they don't. And then you have the next step, which is specific projects or specific actions on
hmm,
national forest or on BLM land. So those are the different levels at which challenges might happen and will happen. So there's plenty of avenues in which to fight on these things.
absolutely.
So we are near the end here. I don't think I'm going to bother to put those other slides up, Callie. I'm just going to say what I was going to say, which is everybody remember you're going to get a follow-up email. You're going to be able to see, or you're going to be able to get a link to the video. We always put these things up, and please share it, spread it as widely as possible. And we just are really, really thankful you're here. But keep watching Wild Virginia. We have lots of other good programs coming up. I know there are a couple in July that we don't have advertised yet, but I'll tell you they're going to be really cool. So that's your hint. Um, so anyway, thanks everybody. Just really, really appreciate you being here. And thanks again, Travis.
Thanks for having me, everybody. Appreciate it.